journalist and White House correspondent with the Gateway Pundit, was arrested after he attempted to deliver a speech entitled "It's Okay to Be White" at the University of Connecticut. Obviously, if anybody has ever been to Connecticut, they would know that it's a bit of an anomaly that this speech would be considered controversial. Apparently, Connecticut believes that it's offensive for people to say that it's okay to be themselves, because Connecticut is white, if you didn't get what I was saying. How did this happen? Well, that's a topic for another video, and really, I've already covered it in numerous videos, in particular the one called "You're White, Stop Embarrassing Yourselves," which I will link in the description. If you're new to my channel, remember the thing about this channel is that I've made a huge amount of videos regarding sociopolitical issues, mainly dissecting the left, which you can watch. So if you want to know more about something, chances are that I have already covered it, and I can link you to it. And I do take requests, especially from people who donate money, which I need at the moment, which I also have a video about that I uploaded 2 days ago. That all said, I kind of feel like I have already said everything I need to say about the endless white people bashing that has gone on in recent years, which has been completely normalized in mainstream culture and on social media, at least in places like Twitter, Facebook, BuzzFeed, MTV, and from countless celebrities. I similarly imagine that Lucian Wintrich was going to make a lot of really good points at this lecture at UConn that he didn't get to deliver on account of him being arrested after having his property snatched from him. Thus, I will be taking this opportunity to focus specifically on the tactic of attack that came from the protester in this instance, and more specifically, the fact that this was yet another grown-ass woman behaving like a child. A professor, in fact. And how I don't think that this is a coincidence in the slightest. We've all seen Yvette Filarka, the smallest woman in the universe, standing at the front lines ahead of her mob of loyal black bloc men, ready to attack anybody she tells them to. We've all seen various other Antifa women say that they are gonna fight men or throw punches at men and then play victim when they get hit back. Now we have this woman grabbing Lucian Wintrich's notes in front of a room full of people expecting to get away with it. Or not. Actually, she was probably hoping for precisely what would happen, that Lucian would try to get his notes back and be arrested for it. These are things that we have grown accustomed to witnessing from the far left, and truthfully, I think it could be easily attributed to the left's inseparable attachment to all things Marxist and feminist, and the ways in which women in leftist spheres have been conditioned their entire lives to believe not just that they can get away with instigating a physical conflict with any man at any time, but also that they can very knowingly use that female privilege to their advantage, teamed up with men who are in on the game. When you have a room full of men who are waiting for their excuse to potentially attack somebody and biased law enforcement who will let it all happen, this is no different than a school teacher who obviously favors the girls in her class and seemingly almost enjoys watching the girls torment boys, knowing that the boys cannot do anything about it. Now, I'm not going to say that female bullies are worse than male bullies, because all bullies are bad people, and I've definitely encountered some really shitty male bullies in my life. But it's definitely a different dynamic of bullying entirely, almost unanimously, when females do it. If we break down bullying into the quote-unquote toxic masculinity model of guys who pick on guys that are smaller than them, or gang up on people and beat them up for fun, this is something that can and does definitely happen, but is almost unanimously disapproved of by the authorities. People tend to get in trouble for beating people up. Females, however, can and do occasionally follow the toxic masculinity model of stereotypical bullying, which would be a bigger female picking on, say, a smaller, prettier girl because she's jealous for getting a date with a guy that the bigger girl liked. This does happen. Still, I would say that female bullying is a lot more common than people realize, and often not only goes unnoticed under the radar, but can even be excused and or enabled by the authorities, like what was seemingly the case at the University of Connecticut with Lucian Wintrich. Bullying, as I would define it, is what happens when somebody has power over another person and has the ability to put that person at a disadvantage if a conflict were to arise, and yet the person who already has the other person at a disadvantage proceeds to instigate the conflict, knowing that they will almost certainly come out on top, like what happened in Connecticut with Lucian getting arrested for getting his notes back. The woman knew that that was going to happen, probably. The left, in general, has a pretty twisted misunderstanding of what bullying actually is in the current year, because they seem to believe that basically anybody who disagrees with them and stands up for themselves is a bully. The biggest example that I can come up with would be the way that the left relentlessly called Trump a bully all through his candidacy, and even to this day. Which honestly perplexed me even when I thought that I hated Trump thoroughly and that I would probably end up voting for Hillary Clinton in the general election. I never ended up voting for Trump, but as time went on, it became more and more obvious that he was the one being bullied by Hillary Clinton and a gigantic media smear campaign against him, which relentlessly lied about him and what he was actually saying as a candidate, lied about his supporters, and literally had hosts ganging up on him during debates. By the time the election rolled around and Trump finally won, despite the fact that I never wanted him to be president in the first place, I couldn't help but feel glad that somebody had stood up successfully to the bullies of the Democratic Party and mainstream media, even though he obviously got his hands dirty and said a few more brash things than a lot of people would prefer. Still, to some people, those brash things he said, standing up to the bullies, makes him the bully. Very probably because, simply, these are mostly people that have issues with assertive heterosexual men, and they cannot bring themselves to possibly emphasize with his position for a moment, nor look at the feminine forms of bullying that he was up against from the Hillary Clinton campaign. And what are those feminine forms of bullying? Well, I get into it a lot in my video, 10 examples of toxic femininity, linked also in the description, but I'll simply add a small form of female bullying that I remember from my youth, which I believe is probably something that was actually fairly common in many people's lives. Let me know if this happened to you. In middle school, I was briefly friends with the popular girls. Or at least they tried to convince me that they were my friends. It's hard to remember how everything went down, really, and how and why I stopped being friends with them. It was probably some combination of me not really liking them and vice versa. However, one thing that I have always suspected is that these girls only befriended me because they suspected that I was gay, and they wanted proof for whatever reason. Either they wanted a gay friend because that would be cool, which is actually pretty likely, or they thought it would be exciting because that type of thing is exciting in middle school and they wanted to tell everybody. Thus, every single girl in the popular girl crew became obsessed with asking me, "Who do you like?" over and over every time they had a chance to talk to me. Obviously, as a young kid who was legitimately gay, I had come up with clever ways of worming around actually answering the question of who I was sexually attracted to. but they kept asking. Truthfully, these girls seem to be a bit overconfident about how easy it would be to use their powers of female inquisition and get me to open up. Because, hello, if I am gay, I'm not attracted to you, and thus have no great reason to feel inclined to share my personal secrets just because you're considered one of the cute girls. Regardless, not long into what was probably only our few months as friends, I started to realize through their actions what one of their favorite ways to bully people was, which is something that I distinctly was reminded of in the way that the woman stole Lucian's notes at the speaking event. You see, the popular girls were very big on note passing, to the point where they always were passing notes to each other in class. It was one of those things where if you would even help them pass notes to each other, you would be considered somewhat cool just for that, and everybody wanted the popular girls to at least be cool with them. Passing notes was against the rules, of course, so helping them out was an act of solidarity or something. However, what I learned by actually hanging out with them a bit and hearing them gossip was something much more devious than appeared on the surface. The popular girls had a habit of very deliberately asking leading and potentially incriminating questions in written format, hoping to get a written response from other kids. They might have done this to anybody, and they obviously figured that they could get students to admit embarrassing things on paper, and then they would have proof that this embarrassing thing really did happen, and they would often use it against them. Undoubtedly, the girls were trying to do that to me in getting me to admit that I was gay on a piece of paper. But I wasn't that stupid, obviously. I wasn't going to write down, "Oh, I have a crush on Chris." Chris, as in the guy. Like, I'm not dumb. Truthfully, 20 years later, I can't remember any specific instances of this blowing up on another student really badly and having it lead to a massive amount of drama. But it was always a looming threat, and it definitely happened more than once. They mostly did it to other girls, but it happened to guys as well. Notes would be passed, incriminating text would be written, and girls would use that against the person deliberately to shame them, embarrass them, or to instigate conflicts between other kids. And if you were stupid enough to fall for it, there was basically nothing that you could do about it. If you freaked out and yelled or started a fight with one of the girls, you would get in trouble, whether you were male or female. More so, passing notes by itself was always against the rules, so you couldn't really complain to the teachers without incriminating yourself. The only thing you could potentially do was tell your friends about what happened, and how the popular girls were total two-faced sociopaths, or whatever, which I think I probably did to the few friends I had besides the popular girls. But unfortunately, these were the popular girls, so nobody really cared that you thought that they were assholes. Everybody agreed that the popular girls were assholes, and yet everybody wanted them to like them. Female bullies, unlike most male bullies, don't generally bully people because they feel that they can get away with it by sheer might of their physical prowess, the way that a guy would pick on a smaller guy. Female bullies usually don't physically pick on physically smaller females too often just for the fun of it. A female bully tends to be a bit more calculated and is a lot more likely to do something completely malicious and rather outlandish, like attempt to get a 13-year-old boy to admit that he is gay on paper, presumably so that she can tell the entire school, knowing perfectly well that he couldn't really retaliate in the slightest. Or they'll snatch the notes from a gay journalist who was trying to deliver a lecture at a university, knowing perfectly well that he'll get in trouble for trying to get those notes back.